My mother kicked me out of the house, and now I'm being adopted by my best friend's mother. Hi Reddit, I'm a 16-year-old guy, and for the past few months, my entire world has been flipped upside down. I'm sharing my story here because I don't know where else to turn, and maybe some of you have been through something similar or have advice on how to handle everything. Here's the deal. My mother kicked me out, and now my best friend's mom, who's been like a second mother to me, is fighting to adopt me. It's been a wild emotional roller coaster, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around how my life got to this point. Let me start from the beginning, when things were still good. My childhood was about as happy and stable as it could be. My mother was everything a kid could wish for, loving, attentive, and supportive in every way. I have memories of her baking cookies on rainy afternoons, cheering me on at every little league game, and reading me bedtime stories even when she was tired. I thought we had a perfect family. Then, everything changed when my little sister was born. At first, it was still manageable. My dad and mom were doing their best to keep us all happy, but my sister was a handful, and it quickly became obvious that raising two kids on one income was going to be a struggle. My dad started working longer hours, sometimes taking night shifts just to pay the bills. We had to move out of our cozy neighborhood and into a place that, well, let's just say it wasn't great. It was a rough area, known for crime and decay. The kind of place that kept you looking over your shoulder even during the day. My mom didn't handle the transition well. She used to be the heart of our family, the glue that held everything together, but under the crushing weight of our new reality, she changed. The loving mother I had always known began to disappear. She became distant, snappy, and sometimes downright mean. It hurt, but I tried to brush it off, thinking she just needed time to adjust. When my sister cried, my mom's frustration would explode, and when my dad came home late from work, they would argue into the early hours. But it was me who bore the brunt of her bitterness. She became cold and manipulative, taking out her anger on me, while my sister got all her affection. My sister, in my mom's eyes, was the baby who needed protection and care, while I was the older son, who, apparently, didn't need or deserve as much love. As the years went by, the divide only deepened. My sister got the best of what little we had, from new clothes to the occasional treat. Meanwhile, I got the leftovers, along with a heavy dose of resentment. Still, I held on to hope. Despite everything, I tried to help my family however I could. That's where my best friend comes in. We've been tight since we were kids, and when things started getting rough at home, his family became my safe haven. His mom, who I'll call M, was like a second mother to me. Their home felt warm and welcoming, a stark contrast to the tension I faced every day in mine. My best friend and I started working odd jobs to make some money. We'd pet sit for neighbors, run errands, and even do yard work, scraping together whatever we could. Once we'd saved a decent amount, we got this wild idea to try our hand at investing. It felt risky, sure, but we were determined to change our futures. It wasn't smooth sailing. There were plenty of losses and setbacks, but over the course of 6 months, we managed to turn a modest profit. M was our biggest cheerleader, telling us that if we kept at it, we'd eventually get out of our rough neighborhood and make something of ourselves. That's when everything blew up. My mom found out about the money I'd made. I thought she'd be proud, maybe even impressed, but instead, she cornered me one night, demanding I hand over a chunk of it to pay my share of the household expenses. I get that we were struggling, but the way she approached me was aggressive and, frankly, scary. She treated me like a financial asset rather than her son. I was willing to help here and there, but she wanted a steady contribution, and I just couldn't agree to that. I tried to explain that the money we'd earned was meant for our future, that it was our way out. But she didn't care. She called me selfish and ungrateful, and the more I resisted, the more her anger flared. It wasn't long before things reached a breaking point. One night, after another explosive argument, she gave me an ultimatum: pay up or get out. When I hesitated, she told me to pack my things. I still remember the way her voice cracked, not with sadness, but with fury. It was as if she couldn't wait to get rid of me, like I was nothing more than a burden she was finally freeing herself from. I grabbed what I could and left. I had nowhere to go but M's house, and when she found out what happened, she was livid. I thought she might march over to my mom's place and confront her right then and there. But instead, M focused on calming me down. She hugged me, told me I wasn't alone, and that I had a place in her home for as long as I needed it. That night, I slept on the couch in her living room, feeling more at peace than I had in years. The relief I felt was overwhelming. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was in a house filled with warmth and kindness. Em treated me like her own son, and I could tell she genuinely cared. She made sure I had everything I needed, from a hot meal to a shoulder to cry on when the weight of it all hit me. My best friend joked that we'd always talked about being brothers, and now it was almost like we really were. But it wasn't over yet. My biological mother didn't just let me go. A few weeks after I moved in with Em, she started trying to get me to come back home. It wasn't an apology though. She told me that if I returned, there would be rules that would cut me off from Em's family completely. She called Em a bad influence and accused her of manipulating me. The manipulation was obvious, and it made me sick to think that my mother, who had once been my protector, was now trying to control me through fear and isolation. That's when Em made a decision that changed everything. She was going to fight for me, legally. She started the process to adopt me and ensure I had a safe, stable home. At the same time, she began taking steps to expose my biological mother's failing preschool business. It was a side hustle my mom had started a few years ago, but it was run poorly and unsafely. Em knew that if she was going to protect me, she needed to make sure my biological mother couldn't use her influence to harm me or anyone else ever again. Update 1. The legal battle that followed was nothing short of a nightmare. Em had always been the strong maternal figure I needed, but I could see the strain this was putting on her. Despite the stress, she remained resolute. The first step was petitioning for temporary guardianship, which would give her legal authority to make decisions for me until the adoption process could be completed. Seeing her dedication, her unwavering commitment to giving me a safe home, made me feel something I hadn't in a long time: security. I remember one afternoon, sitting in Em's living room with her and my best friend, papers spread across the coffee table. Em was reviewing everything with her lawyer on the phone, while my best friend and I tried to stay out of the way. The whole thing felt surreal. How had my life come to this? How had I gone from a relatively happy family to fighting to be adopted by someone else's mother? But as I watched Em juggle legal jargon, advocate for me, and make sure I was okay, I realized that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about the people who show up when it matters, the ones who make sacrifices to keep you safe. It felt like a small light in the darkness, and I clung to it with everything I had. Then there were the court dates. I had to stand there, facing my biological mother across a cold courtroom, each side represented by lawyers who argued over what was in my best interest. My mother tried to make herself look like a concerned and loving parent who had made a few mistakes but wanted her son back. Her words were carefully chosen, full of claims that she loved me and that our issues were just temporary. I almost believed her for a moment, until I remembered the anger in her eyes when she told me to pack my things. Her lawyer painted Em as a manipulative woman who had taken advantage of a vulnerable teenager. They claimed she'd driven a wedge between me and my mother, brainwashing me into thinking I was better off without my family. The accusations were absurd, but they still stung. I wanted to scream, to tell the judge everything I'd been through, to make them understand that Em wasn't the problem. She was the solution. Thankfully, I got my chance. When I testified, I spoke about how my mother had changed over the years, how the financial stress and favoritism had made me feel unwanted. I described the moment she kicked me out, how I'd felt like nothing more than a financial burden to her. But most importantly, I talked about Em, how she had stepped up when I had nowhere else to go, how she treated me like her own son and gave me the kind of unconditional support I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't easy, and my voice trembled the entire time, but I got through it. As the case dragged on, my biological mother didn't let up. She started showing up unannounced, trying to catch me outside Em's house, claiming she just wanted to talk. Each encounter left me rattled, and Em had to eventually file for a restraining order to keep her away from us. It was a constant battle, one that drained all of us emotionally. But Em never wavered. She kept reminding me that we'd get through this together. Meanwhile, Em's effort to shut down my mother's preschool business gained momentum. Em had reported several safety violations, and an investigation was launched. I knew it was a risky move, that it could make my mother even angrier, but it was necessary. The preschool was a disaster waiting to happen, and Em was determined to protect me and any other child who might be affected by my mother's recklessness. One night, after another long day of legal proceedings, Em and I sat in the kitchen, exhausted but unable to sleep. She made us both tea, and for the first time in weeks, we talked about something other than the case. She told me about her own struggles, how she'd had to fight for everything she had after her own difficult childhood, and how she promised herself that if she ever had the chance to help someone, she wouldn't hesitate. "You're not just a responsibility to me," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You're family, and I'll keep fighting for you as long as it takes." Hearing those words broke something in me. The weight I'd been carrying, the fear and anxiety, seemed to lighten just a little. I didn't realize I was crying until Em reached over and squeezed my hand. It was the first time in years that I felt truly safe, and it was a feeling I would never take for granted again. But even with the support, the anxiety never fully went away. Each day felt like a ticking clock, waiting for the next legal hurdle, the next moment when everything could change. School became harder to focus on, and I started falling behind on my work. My teachers were understanding, but it was hard not to feel like I was failing in more ways than one. The only thing that kept me going was my best friend, and the vision of a future where this nightmare was behind me. Then finally, we got some good news. The investigation into my mother's preschool found serious issues, enough to force it to close. It was a small victory, but it felt like a step in the right direction. The judge had more evidence that my biological mother's life was too unstable to provide a safe home for me. The final hearing approached, and the tension was unbearable. Em and I prepared ourselves for every outcome, knowing that even if we lost, we'd keep fighting. On the day of the hearing, I walked into the courtroom with my head held high, determined to see this through. The judge listened to both sides and took a long pause before delivering the verdict. It felt like the whole world had stopped, waiting for that one moment. And then, the judge ruled in our favor. Em was granted permanent guardianship, with the adoption process officially moving forward. My biological mother was visibly furious, but I barely noticed. All I could hear were the words that changed everything. I was finally free. When we left the courtroom, I was overwhelmed with emotion. I hugged Em so tightly, feeling every bit of relief, gratitude, and love that I'd held back for so long. I wasn't just a kid who'd been kicked out of his house anymore. I was someone who had been chosen, someone worth fighting for, and that realization was something I would carry with me forever. Update 2. That night, Em threw a small celebration at home. The days following the judge's decision felt almost surreal. I'd been so consumed by fear and uncertainty for so long that I didn't quite know how to process the sudden feeling of safety. It was as if I'd been holding my breath for months, and now, finally, I could exhale. Em was officially my guardian, and while the adoption process wasn't complete yet, we both knew it was only a matter of time. Nothing extravagant, just a simple dinner with me, my best friend, and a couple of close family friends. We laughed and ate until we were stuffed, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like a normal teenager. We put on music, joked about everything and nothing, and my best friend even surprised me with a cake he'd made himself. It was lopsided and looked like it had survived a minor earthquake, but I didn't care. It was perfect. Sitting there, surrounded by people who truly loved me, I realized how far I'd come. My life wasn't what I'd envisioned a few years ago, but it was better in ways I hadn't expected. I had a family who chose me, people who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. I had hope. Of course, not everything was magically fixed overnight. There were still the emotional scars left by my biological mother, wounds that couldn't be healed by a court decision. She tried reaching out a few times after the ruling, leaving me messages that ranged from tearful apologies to angry rants. It was confusing and painful, and I wasn't sure how to handle it. Em suggested setting clear boundaries and reminded me that I had the right to decide if or when I wanted to let her back into my life. It took time, but I eventually responded to one of her messages. I told her that I needed space, that I wasn't ready to have a relationship until I'd healed from what had happened. It was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. Part of me still longed for the mother I remembered from my childhood, the woman who used to tuck me in at night and make me feel safe. But I also knew that person wasn't there anymore, at least not in the way I needed her to be. Accepting that was painful, but it was a necessary step toward moving forward. Meanwhile, life with Em and my best friend felt like a dream. Em went above and beyond to make sure I had everything I needed, not just physically, but emotionally. She even arranged for me to see a therapist, someone I could talk to about everything I'd been through. At first I was skeptical. Talking about my feelings wasn't exactly my strong suit, but over time it helped. I started unpacking all the trauma and guilt I'd carried with me, and slowly I began to feel lighter. School became easier to manage too. With the legal battle behind me, I could finally focus on my studies and my future. I caught up on all the work I'd missed, and with Em's encouragement, I even started thinking about college. It was something I'd almost given up on, but now the possibility felt real again. I didn't just want to survive anymore. I wanted to thrive. My best friend and I also went back to our investment project, something we'd put on hold during the chaos. We were more careful this time, learning from our past mistakes and taking a more strategic approach. It felt good to have a goal, something to work toward that represented our shared dreams. Em continued to support us, giving us advice and cheering us on every step of the way. A few months after the court ruling, the adoption was finalized. I remember standing in the courthouse with Em, my best friend, and our small group of supporters, feeling a rush of emotions I couldn't quite name. When the judge declared Em my legal mother, she pulled me into a hug, and I knew that this wasn't just a legal formality, it was a new beginning. From that day forward, Em insisted that we do something to mark the occasion. She called it our Family Day, a celebration of the day we officially became mother and son. We decided to keep it simple, a hike in a nearby park followed by a picnic. As we sat there looking out over the rolling hills, Em asked me what I wanted for my future. It was a question I hadn't thought about in a long time, but now I felt like I finally had the right to dream again. I want to go to college, I said, and maybe one day I want to help kids like me, kids who don't feel like they have anyone in their corner. Em smiled, her eyes glistening with pride. You'd be amazing at that, she said, and no matter what you choose, I'll be right here, cheering you on. That conversation stuck with me, and I knew she meant every word. I wasn't just someone she had taken in out of obligation. I was her son, and she was my mom in every way that mattered. The past was still there, but it no longer defined me. I had a future to look forward to, a family that loved me, and the strength to keep pushing forward. Since then, my life has continued to change, but in good ways. My grades have improved. I'm on track to apply to colleges, and I'm learning to take each day as it comes. The pain from my biological mother's rejection still lingers, but I'm working through it, one step at a time. I've even started volunteering at a local community center where I mentor kids who are going through tough times. It feels like I'm paying forward the kindness I received, and it gives me a sense of purpose. To anyone out there who feels lost, abandoned, or like your world is falling apart, I want you to know that things can get better. It won't happen overnight, and the pain doesn't just vanish, but there's hope. There are people out there who will choose you, who will fight for you, and who will remind you that you're worth loving. I know that now. Thank you, Reddit, for listening to my story. It's not perfect, and I still have a lot to figure out, but for the first time in a long while, I'm excited about the future, and that's a feeling I'll never take for granted.